Good morning. Good morning. Great to be here today. It's always fun to get out after the legislative session wraps up and see what the reactions are to what transpired in the middle of the night here and the last weekend of the session. So Adosh and I are going to do kind of a tag team here. Adosh is our government relations director, and he's going to walk you through some of the key policy changes, and I'm going to talk about the finance changes. We have way more information in the PowerPoint than what we can go through in detail, so we're just going to kind of go through and hit some of the highlights. The first 47 pages is me, and that's the and that's the school finance stuff. So let's non-budget year, but there's always stuff going on, right? So this gives you kind of a quick recap of where the spending levels came in, the governor, the House, the Senate, and what finally came out of the conference committee. One thing I will say is the governor hasn't signed the bill yet, so we have to make sure that that actually happens. The governor has options to line item veto. Don't expect anything like that, but this stuff isn't in the bank until the governor signs the bottom line here, and we're hoping that'll happen in the next few days. He has 14 days, I think, after he gets the bill to make his final decision. So the bottom line here is that there's $78 million of spending in the current biennium, offset by the $53 million coming from the assumption about the repayment of capital loans. So the net spending in the current biennium, $25 million. As you can see, that's roughly halfway between the governor and Senate positions, which were pretty closely aligned this year, and the House position. So it's about a 0.2%. It's not a spending year, but there's some supplemental changes that are going on there. That's the education bill. In my mind, the more significant change is in the tax bill. So I'm going to say a little bit about the tax bill. I think if any of you have ag land in your district, and most districts do, there is significant property tax relief for school districts in the tax bill. $44 million for this next upcoming levy. So how does that work? The new school building ag bond credit applies to agricultural property and managed forest land. It pays 40% of the net levy. After you calculate the gross levy, we pick up any equalization aid you get, and then we reduce that by 40% of the tax bill on the ag land. So this is real property tax relief to all of the owners of ag land and managed forest land out there, and it's bigger than anything in the education bill. $44 million ongoing kind of tax relief. We do have a run posted to our website, which we got from the Revenue Department. You can look up, based on the estimates of what your debt service levy will be next year, how much we're estimating each school district will get in tax relief. It's under the school finance page, and then funding projections and trends. It's a spreadsheet that shows district by district what we expect the property tax relief to be. There's a process that we go through. I'm not going to go through the details of that here. Then we get to the early repayment of the maximum effort loans, and Brad talked about that some. I won't go into the details. The House picked up on that originally based on similar language that was enacted in 2011, back when Representative Garofalo, who represents Farmington, was the chair of the House Education Finance Committee, and Farmington was one of the capital loan districts. And so this year the similar idea was floated. I think Caledonia was one that brought up the issue. The House assumed, based on the fiscal note, that we'd have $53 million of savings. And then the Senate and the governor looked at that and said, oh, that's a pretty good deal. We'll take $53 million if we can get it. So it was agreed to by all three parties that we would be at $53 million in terms of savings. And I think the idea was, well, we did it for these other group of districts. Let's give the same opportunity to the districts that didn't take advantage of that early loan repayment the last time it was offered. As Brad alluded to, there were some concerns raised by some of the districts, primarily East Central, that gee, you're kind of counting your money before you're sure you're going to get it there. And so the legislature was very interested in making sure they had that $53 million because it's the source for about 2/3 of the spending in the bill. And so they used both the carrot and the stick. The stick was eliminating the opportunity for capital loan districts to issue what we call one-day bonds. In other words, doing a bond issue for the amount the district would otherwise have to pay the state back on their capital loan and then using it for projects locally. Generally pretty easy to pass those because the question is, do you want to levy the same rate and use the money locally or do you want to pay it back to the state? So anyway, that provision was eliminated, and then in addition to that, there were actually two incentives provided, one in the tax bill, one in the education bill. The incentive in the tax bill basically pays back the interest that the capital loan districts have paid since 1997 on their capital loans. I think the idea was Caledonia had paid back like $6 million. They said, gee, you're forgiving this interest for all these other districts, but they haven't paid back hardly any interest. We've paid back a lot more. We think it should be fair to do that. So that was authored by Representative Davids, who happens to represent Caledonia and is the chair of the House Tax Committee. But there are other districts that benefited from that as well. And then on the Senate side, East Central, I believe, is represented by Senator Laurie, who's chair of the Health and Human Services Committee and was a member of the Conference Committee. And he was concerned about, the issues that there might be a tax increase in East Central in the short term. They're losing their opportunity to do one-day bonds. And so on the Senate side, they kind of looked at, well, how much money have you been getting from one-day bonds in the last few years? And they provided basically a 5-year period where they're essentially giving those districts what they would have been getting from one-day bonds or past what they've been getting. So basically, I think it ended up being kind of a win-win in my perspective. The state got the $53 million it needed to fund some of the other programs, and those districts got some tax relief and also continuation of some of that revenue for a 5-year period. So early childhood was a big focus in the spending. The governor and the Senate were aligned in terms of supporting voluntary pre-K at $25 million, and that ended up in the final bill. The House was interested in providing more dollars for the early childhood rating system, which is also included at $2 million in the final bill, and more money for the Parent-Child Home Program, which is funded at $2 million in the bill. And the House also added an early childhood pilot for St. Cloud, which happens to be the home of the Senate Ways and Means Committee chairman, Representative Knopfler. So that was $430,000. So that $29 million of the bill went into the pre-K area. Some of the details of the pre-K model. Student eligibility is all children who are 4 years old as of September 1st. The funding model is a formula-driven model. Basically, the language is written like we had universal pre-K. Students can qualify for up to 6/10 of a pupil unit. If you're included in the funding, which is quite limited, then you get the extra pupil units. It flows through all of your funding formulas, just like as if it had been universal pre-K. I think from the governor's perspective, the idea was get the language in place so we could do universal pre-K and then probably work to increase the size of the cap so that you're basically eliminating the restrictions on who can participate over time. There are some program requirements. Again, we don't have time to go through the details, but it requires the program to have at least 350 hours of instruction during the year. It requires staff to child ratios of 1 to 10 with a maximum class size of 20. It requires that the salaries for instructional staff be comparable to the K-12 program in the district. There are a number of other policies there that I'm not going to go through the detail due to time, but if you're interested in applying for that program, one of the key things is you have to apply by July 1st. So we're talking about a very short time frame. Let me go to the next slide. The funding level for the program is set at $27 million in aid entitlement, which converts to the $25 million in appropriations for the current year. It's sufficient to fund about 6% of all the kindergartners or pre-kindergartners in the state. And the way that the money is broken up, it's based on the number of kindergartners in 4 groups in the prior year. So 10% of the money goes to Minneapolis and St. Paul. 43% goes to, or 40% goes to metropolitan 7-county suburbs. 43% goes to non-metro school districts, and 7% goes to charter schools. Now, within each of those 4 groups, the funding will be allocated based on the prior year kindergarten free and reduced lunch concentration, and then also whether there is a 3 or 4 star rated parent-aware program in the district or near the district. And I think the primary focus will be on the poverty level. So essentially, you will probably need to be a pretty high poverty district in order to, or actually site, because it's on a site basis, in order to qualify. But it all depends on how many districts and schools and charter schools apply before July 1. Because the funding is going to be flat, pretty much, for the next 3 years, unless there's change in the next legislative session, pretty much the schools that get in for fiscal 17 are going to be the same schools that get in for 18 and 19, barring any change in legislation. The funding is set so that the students that are in the program would generate pupil units based on the ratio of hours to 850 hours with a cap of 0.6. So if you're running a 425-hour program, that would be a 0.5 pupil unit weight. It would count for basic general ed revenue, referendum revenue, state schools levies, all of the different things that are based on pupil units. Another change here that relates to early childhood was home visiting levy, equalizing it right out of the playbook for C, I think. So we are now, instead of having a $1.60 unequalized levy, we now have a $3 per pupil equalized levy with a pretty decent equalizing factor, $17,250. Moving on to other areas, not much activity in the general education area, but there was some movement on the equity revenue. Some non-metro districts will be getting some additional equity revenue. We've always had the disparity between the metro and the non-metro, and they're working to eliminate that. There was an effort in the Senate to fund concurrent enrollment that didn't occur. There's a very small program for graduation incentives for a small group of people age 21. And then there's $12.1 million for support staff grants that came out in the final deal. So let's say a little bit more about that. So for equity revenue, the change that finally got enacted is that beginning in fiscal 17, the non-metro districts will get a 16% bump. So they're not quite up to the 25% bump yet. But the law says that beginning in 2020, they'll get to the 25% bump. So metro and non-metro by then would all be treated the same on the equity formula. In order to avoid a double levy, the increase for fiscal 17 is all state aid, and then it goes to the regular formula. The graduation incentives was a proposal out of Minneapolis. It's pretty narrowly limited to schools that were in this early middle college program who have had a interrupted education. So it's a very small group that would get funding for the 1 year when they're age 21. Support staff grants, more general interest there, $12.1 million. It's a 6-year matching grant, 1-to-1 match the first 4 years, $3 local to $1 state match the last 2 years, no more than $2.4 million. So the $12 million sounds like a lot, but really what it is it's about $2 million a year over a 6-year period. We're figuring it's going to be enough to cover about 60 to 65 positions. This could be guidance counselors, nurses, chemical dependency counselors, I'm forgetting what else, but various types of licensed support staff. Social workers and psychologists. Thanks, Brad. The department will be working on a process to do that program. there's a requirement that priority provided to schools where these support service positions currently do not exist. And there's supposed to be an equal split, metro and non-metro. And there are some other criteria like what's the existing caseload, what are the demographics, student survey data, graduation rates, and so forth. So the department will need to come up with a process for reviewing and approving those grants. And the idea is probably districts that apply and get funded for a position. These have to be new positions. You can't use it to fund existing positions. Those grants would then be good for 6 years. So it's kind of, again, apply now or you're not going to get additional funding in the following year, probably. Let's see here. Okay, revenue disparity report. Just want to mention that that's the 95th and 5th percentile. We're moving the date back from October to December so we can include the latest referendum data. It'll just give the legislature and school districts a little bit more up-to-date information on what the revenue disparities are across the state. There were a couple of local bills. Glenville-Emmons district made a mistake on their effective date for the referendum, and they inadvertently lost the referendum revenue for 1 year, even though they kind of explained to the district that they were really intending to have the revenue, but we were going by what the ballot said. And they were able to convince the legislature to restore the funding for that 1 year, assuming that they have a unanimous vote by the school board to do that. And then we had a special bill for Moorhead and Dilworth, Glendon, Felton to allow them to do some realignment of the boundaries with a local process that they need to go through. The superintendent there was very active in working with the community and with the legislature to get that done. Staff development area, I know one of the big disappointments was that there was no TD&E funding. Both the governor and the Senate included $10 million for that purpose. But I think the highest priority ended up being some of the pre-K, and given the size of the targets, that did not get included. There was funding for intermediate and cooperative staff development, $4.5 million, which is again spread over 3 years. The Q comp was enough to cover Rocori and Buffalo, but not expanding it statewide. The Senate wanted to eliminate the cap completely. And then there was a teacher workforce package, a variety of various things to help districts with the teacher workforce. It was funded about $10 million in a lot of small categories. So, what about the intermediate co-op staff development grants? $4.5 million spread over 3 years. Intermediates and other co-ops providing instruction in federal setting 4 or higher are eligible. The funding is based on $1,000 times the number of FTE licensed instructional and non-licensed classroom aides employed during the previous fiscal year. Again, QComp, there was the correction for fiscal 16 to allow the kind of inadvertent reduction for the last 2 districts in. And then there was also some flexibility language to the department in case we have a similar situation in the future. Right? You know, the way the laws always work is the last district in takes it on the chin if there's a change in the pupil units for anybody else, because we fully fund the first district, we fully fund the second district, and the last district takes all of the hit. So what this allows the department to do in the future, if we run into a similar situation, is we are allowed to prorate the aid, which would probably be a very tiny proration level, or there's a possibility of shifting money between the years of the biennium. Like in this biennium, we had extra money in the second year because the cap was going up. The department could shift that to the first year if we ended up with a small shortfall in the program. So it's a little more flexibility for the department. Okay, the teacher workforce package. There are a number of provisions. I'm not going to go through the details given the time, but you can see what those are. And then we do have some follow-up slides, professional pathway to teacher licensure, the teacher shortage loan forgiveness, student teacher support. There's a special grant for the Northwest region. So I'm going to skip over those, but you have some material you can read and point you to the bill. Certainly we can answer questions if those come up. Then for special education, there was a reserve requirement added for third-party billing revenue. The law already said districts should use the money for certain purposes. This adds an accounting requirement in UFAR to say you must set that money aside and use it for those purposes. Also, there was some clarification that intermediates and cooperatives can charge member fees and access fees. And there was a lot of clarification. We're still kind of cleaning up the special ed funding formula based on the law changes that occurred a couple of years ago as we began implementation. There was some special ed changes relating to MDE, including $2.7 million for positive behavioral intervention and supports. There were some issues dealing with paperwork, requiring the department to use existing budget resources to identify and remove 25% of the paperwork burden on districts associated with state but not federal requirements, and I don't know the details of how we'll address that. And then the legislature also eliminated a $1.6 million appropriation to help us do that, which is the money that was set aside for the online IP. So kind of conflicting directives. There were a couple of small adjustments to charter schools, one allowing Metro Dept to enroll pre-K students, and the other one providing a cash flow adjustment to special ed charter schools. In the infrastructure area, the Senate had what they call a Generation Connect aid that didn't get funded, and there was a broadband innovation grant program in the House that got scaled way back and funded at $500,000. I've got more details on the broadband grants here, but I don't have the time here to go through the detail. Facilities and technology area, I think of interest to the C membership especially, is there was a little progress on debt service equalization. We would like to see more, but the legislature did approve a Senator Dahl bill that would provide indexing of the debt service formula. So basically we've had a huge slide in the portion of debt service that's covered by the state. It's kind of maybe too little too late, but this will prevent the state's share of debt service from going down any lower than it currently is by indexing. So the equalizing factor will automatically go up in the future as the state average property tax base grows. There's also a provision that excludes school district contracts for information system software from the Uniform Municipal Contracting Bid Law. And there were a lot of technical clarifications. If you go through the facilities article, you'll see a whole bunch of language, but basically it's just technical language cleaning up what we're already doing. Adult basic education, there was some cleanup there as well, and also some new money for a couple of grants, $400,000 in a couple of different areas. Some other miscellaneous spending in the $1 million plus category, reading corps grants $1 million, full service community schools $1 million, Girls in Action grants $1.5 million, Santa Foundation $1.5 million, IT enhancements, that was for the department, $1 million. We're trying to replace some of our mainframe technology that goes back to the mid-70s. We asked for a whole lot more money, so we're trying to figure out what we can do with $1 million when we thought it cost several million, but it'll help. And then there's a certification incentive revenue for $1 million. So this was a year when we had kind of more than the usual amount of grant funding, mostly one time. And a lot of it was because the legislature had very little money. They were getting one-time money from the $53 million, and so they had to look at what can we do on a one-time basis. We do have a little more detail on the reading grants and the full-service community schools in the packet, but we don't really have time to go through it. Also some of these grant programs. Then there were some other kind of smaller programs that were funded. Again, a variety of grants. The list just goes on in terms of various grants that were funded. So these ones range from $900,000 to $10,000. Then if we look at the tails, there are $79 million of tails in the bill. Most of the tails are for the voluntary pre-K. So that's essentially funded at about $27 million a year. It allows the schools that get in 2017 to keep the program going in 2018 and 2019. The other larger tail in the bill is the ongoing funding for equity revenue, and the maximum effort loan repayment incentive costs us a little bit of money because when we get the loans back this year, that means we're getting less repaid next year, and then we're continuing to pay over 5 years some of these incentive payments to those schools. On the levy side, there's very little change in tax levies for schools. Because of the pre-K program, some of the levies for schools go up. So if you're in the pre-K program, you get more referendum revenue. You get more safe schools levy. There are a variety, anything based on pupil units is going to go up. And so what the legislature did is offset that with an increase in the equalizing factor for operating capital, so they could end up with a zero net total change in tax levies statewide. So I apologize for dashing through that very quickly, but that's kind of a quick overview of the finance side. I'm going to turn it over to Adosh to review the policy change.
Okay, thank you, Tom. Again, my name is Adosh. I'm the Director of Government Relations at Dept. Last year was my first opportunity to present on the bill from the legislature, so I'm thankful to be back again. The policy side is a little bit more of, the presentation is a little bit more of kind of going through the articles as they're presented in the bill. So bear with me, we'll skip over some of the stuff that's a little bit not as big, but hopefully this gives you a good overview of the policy sections of the bill. So in general education, that's usually the first article in the bill, is only a few changes. We're explicitly identifying a special education cooperative under the definition of cooperative, so that carries all the rights and revenue streams there. We're just making sure that they're included there. There was some testimony from a food provider that wasn't initially approved by the department to participate in the federal child and adult care food program. Now the bill came out with some compromise language that allows them or requires the department to provide approval criteria and how an applicant can show financial viability. We have to post the process and timeline of the decision that MDA will provide, and if we do, and we have to state that if we do deny it, we have to provide an explanation for denial and post an appeals process. So this is basically just requiring MDE to post what we already do. Moving on to assessments, it seems like every year there's something done on assessments. It's either assessments or licensure, and they didn't let you down this year. So students are encouraged to take the college entrance exam to the extent that funds are available. I think this is just clarifying language based on the changes they made last year. Our staff in the assessments division, Assistant Commissioner Kevin Henry and the Director of Assessments, Jennifer Dugan, are still mulling over this language, so keep your eyes and ears open for any updates there. Districts can offer now the ACT and or the SAT. Originally it said the ACT. If a student decides that the test that the district is offering is not the one they want to take, so if you're offering ACT and they want to take the SAT, you don't have to give it to them, but they can take it off-site out of the school day at like a testing center, and they're still eligible for the reimbursement for whatever state funds are available. Districts and charters, this is a little bit more work for districts, have to publish online a calendar of all the standardized tests, the rationale for each, and whether it's a local option or a state and federally required, state or federally required. If there's no agreement between the school board and the teachers union on the assessments, the districts have to create an assessment committee to decide what, to consult on what the local tests would be. You don't have to create the committee, you can also seek advice from your World's Best Workforce committees. And then districts, in addition to providing information on student performance to parents, now have to provide it to teachers. More assessment stuff, surprise, surprise. MDE has to develop an online system for teachers, administrators, and students to provide complaints about any service disruptions or technical interruptions. And then a district employee, any district employee who reports this to the MDE database is protected from retaliation. MDE has to create a form for parents if they want to opt out. As you know, over the past 2 years, opting out of the state tests has been very in vogue in some districts, if you can take it like that. MDE has to create a form for these parents if they want to opt out of state or locally required standardized testing. And the form has to say what the state standards are, which tests are aligned to the standards, say what the consequences for the school and the student are if they don't participate, and ask parents to indicate the reason for their denial. So it seems like kind of extra work for everybody. And not just MDE, but, districts kind of have to pay attention to this, and the parents are gonna have to do more work if they want to opt out. So there's pros and cons to that. So as you know, in the 2013 law, we were required to create a benchmark based off of the MCA scores for grades 3 through 8 that kind of showed a trajectory towards clear and college readiness. On top of that, MDE also did the high school tests as well, because we knew that we were going to be asked, and it didn't make sense to just do the benchmarks for 3 through 8. We wanted to get those high school exams again. Well, the legislature now, there was some disagreement between MDE and MNSCU over the legislature's desire to say that if you get that MCA benchmark that says you're career and college ready, you can't be forced to take remedial non-credit courses in a MNSCU institution. So there was some back and forth because MNSCU feels that that's important, but didn't feel that there was a validity to the MCA benchmarks for the purpose of prohibiting a student from taking remedial courses. The compromise that the legislature and MNSCU came up with, without input from MDE, was that the chancellor, or the MDE has to do the benchmarks in consultation with the chancellor, and the chancellor may approve or disapprove of the benchmarks by the end of this year. If he does reject it, he or she does reject it, he has to provide written reasons to MDE and suggested revisions for it, which the commissioner has to incorporate into the new benchmarks. So the benchmarks are approved, then they're effective in the 16-17 school year or the following school year, no later than the following school year. If the benchmarks are denied and have to be revised, then they have to be established no later than the 18-19 school year. And as I mentioned, based on those benchmarks, MNSCU would no longer be able to require a student to achieve those benchmarks from taking remedial non-credit courses if they met those. That currently exists for if a student achieves an ACT indicator. I think it's a 22 composite score on the ACT that was put in last year. So this is a similar measure based off of the MCAs. Student survey. Some of you may have heard that in the House language that was carried in a conference committee, they were going to prohibit any state agency from administering a student survey that asked about a lot of personal information like substance abuse, sexual behavior, sexual orientation, things like that. So I think some more conservative factors in the legislature thought was too personal. The compromise language was basically codifying what the federal notice is. So that includes districts having to inform parents of the policies and dates of the scheduled surveys. These are all things I think that are required if the parent asks for it. This is just now putting a little bit more responsibility on districts and charters. You have to also give parents timely notice of the schedule to surveys and an opportunity to review the survey and allow students to opt out, already allowed. And districts can't penalize a student for opting out. And then districts have to develop policies in consultation with parents on conducting student surveys and using or distributing personal student information. So that might be a little bit more of a task. But this is much more of a compromise than the provision of not allowing the student surveys to be operated at the state level. We would have lost a lot of important information, especially on things like tobacco use. That's something that we testified to many times against the original provision. So that would have been data loss that's important to parents and districts. Student discipline. You may have also heard that there were some bills on student discipline that came from widely varying angles. There was also a student discipline working group that passed into law, so I think there's about 27 members who are going to be on that group. It's going to maybe be an unwieldy group, but it's going to be an important group that looks at the Pupil Fair Dismissal Act. But there were some provisions adopted from the House that do touch on student discipline. So boards are going to have to report to MDE student on teacher assaults and the intervention resolution that resulted from that within 30 days of the dismissal or assault. Within our MDE DERS report, our internal reporting to the commissioner, we have to include these assaults and we have to aggregate the discipline and assault data in our school performance reports. And then district policies have to include a provision that a student must be removed from class immediately for violent behavior assault, and defines assault under the criminal code. You can see that there in your packets. And then finally, a teacher has a right to know if a student in the classroom has physically assaulted a district employee. So these are provisions that We wanted to pump the brakes on because we wanted the student discipline working group to really look at it and get a lot of stakeholder input, but the legislature went ahead and codified these provisions as well. So we'll see as the working group goes forward how that hamstrings kind of the discussions, or maybe we can work around it and make them workable. Just briefly, the MDE has to work with the Department of Public Safety to make sure all districts have a school crisis response team, and there was some language involving the school trust lands director. Civics tests. This is something that the commissioner really was opposed to. This was a big push. All the leaders signed on to this bill, minority and majority parties, to have a civics test required of students. Originally, it was going to be a graduation requirement, but that was reduced. The commissioner is still really opposed to this. It's a new test. It's based off of the U.S. citizenship test that we're giving to our students. A nonprofit picks 50 out of 100 questions every single year, and a student, by the time they graduate, has to get 30 out of 50 questions correct. There's a little bit of confusion if the questions change every year. How are districts supposed to manage if the student doesn't get 30 out of 50 in their first year? It starts in the 18-19 or 17-18 school year for those that start in 9th grade. You can wrap it into your curriculum so you can get it however you want. The way it doesn't seem like a graduation requirement is you can't withhold a diploma or prevent graduation from a student that doesn't achieve the 30 out of 50 questions. So that's a good part of it, but the student still has to take it, and you still have to, the districts and charters still have to give their test. Yes?
Were there any reporting requirements for this?
I did not see any reporting requirements, although there is some language under the standards portion that just says, you can't create, MDE can't create a social studies test, but that doesn't include a civics test. I don't think there are any reporting requirements, but that, we're going to have our testing people take a look at it to see if anything under other laws would require it. But at first blush, there's no reporting requirements. You do have, the districts and charters do have the ability to put it on the student's transcript if they want to, that they got the 30 out of 50. So this is not a great provision. We're not super excited about it. This is information that I know districts and charters are covering or doing better than this provision would be doing. But this was a strong push from some groups and all the leaders push on it. I mean, we're going to be looking at it, and again, I can assure you the commission does not like this provision. And if you have any other further questions, I can answer them offline. If you want to voice your displeasure to your legislators, you'd be welcome to. Physical education standards. So as you know, the physical education standards were last updated from the 2004 NASB standards in 2010 or 11. Now this coming year, the department has to adopt the current shape standards, even though in legislation it says NASB. There's a drafting error on their part, so we have to get that cleaned up. We've just done 2016 or 17 adopting, and we may adapt. I think we're going to adapt them. One of the standards is synchronized swimming. I'm sure not a lot of schools are outfitted for having synchronized swimming be available to all their students. So we're going to go through a review and revision process, an expedited one, and then we'll do rulemaking, and they'll be available in 2 years. And we also have to make sample assessments available to districts by the 18-19 school year. How that's going to look, we don't know. The company that has the publishing rights, we haven't seen what their pricing models are. All other standards that are going to be reviewed and going into rulemaking are all pushed back 1 year. So arts was the one that was going to be in 16-17, it's going to be in 17-18. The advocates were and the legislators were very, pushed this very aggressively, and they wanted it as soon as possible. So the other standards had to make way a little bit. Our department has already heard from some of the standards communities on this. The BE standards will be reviewed again in the 22-23 school year, and then it's in that cycle where the other ones are going to be, where then it's reviewed every 10 years thereafter. So it'll be reviewed at 32, 33, and so on and so forth. And then, so a student can be exempted from PE for health issues, disabilities, religious grounds, and districts are strongly encouraged not to punish K-5 students by removing them from recess. Strongly encouraged. Data disaggregation, more fun work for everybody. We really pushed hard against doing this right away. We wanted to bring home, again, a stakeholder group under our ESSA discussions to really capture what are the correct data points to capture. Again, we were working with advocates and authors that were very passionate about this and wanted it in law right away. So this is going to be work for MDE and for districts and charters. We have to provide disaggregated data on student performance and school reports on a range of categories like home language, refugee status, those who were previously English language learners, and populations above 1,000 on the most recent decennial census. And so districts are going to have to collect and report this information. It's effective for the 17-18 school year. So I've talked with Jennifer Dugan, our testing director, who also does a lot of data capturing for school reports. They're going to take a look at what the requirement is on the district's end of when you're going to have to start collecting this data and presenting it to NDE. We're going to have to work on definitions for what exactly captures refugee status. How do you even collect that on the district level accurately without infringing on people's rights? So there's a lot of challenges there that we're going to have to look at. This is one of the reasons why we wanted to do the stakeholder group, but we lost that fight. We tried really, really hard. I don't think it's going to be easy, but we're going to work as hard as we can to make it as accurate and as streamlined as possible for people. But that's something that I can say we weren't happy about, and I'm sure you're not either. For education, succeeding in education excellence, districts have to have some duties improving instruction and curriculum. The advisory committee has to recommend means to improve equitable student access to effective and diverse teachers. And now schools must, not just may, it's currently may, establish a site team to develop and implement strategies on improved instruction and cultural competencies. And the teams have to have an equal number of teachers and administrators and at least one parent. Students not reading at grade level. This was a compromise language from a Senate proposal that was going to have the students who weren't reading at grade level be retained third grade retention for that, so it was punishing third graders for not reading at grade level. It was pared back, and pared back, and pared back, and the resulting policy kind of came in as a surprise. MDE wasn't consulted. I don't think the districts were consulted either. So districts have to provide their report on students not reading at grade level to MDE by July 1st, and you have to provide summary efforts on screening and identifying students with dyslexia or convergence deficiency disorder. And here's the kicker: all students identified under this section must be given alternate instruction under the special education statute. I think it was 125A.62 or 26. I can't remember what the exact one was. So I think that's a large responsibility for districts to serve students who aren't reading at grade level. And again, I can tell you the commissioner was not happy about this provision.
Funding for that then?
Pardon me?
And funding along with that for special ed? Good one.
Let me tell you, there was a push for funding for all sorts of stuff that fell on deaf ears at the legislature this year. So,
But we can't report them. You said that under special ed, but you can't report them as special ed then if they're dyslexic or?
that I don't know. All I know is the reference is provide alternate instruction under the special education statute. We're going to be providing more. I know our department's going to be providing more guidance on this. It's just like I'm not a special education expert. This bill was passed on Sunday. It hasn't even been signed, but trust me, we're going to be working really hard to provide you all the accurate, up-to-date information as we always try to do. I'm just making you aware of these provisions right now. Open enrollment, so children of district staff have priority, are in the priority list for open enrollment. Currently it's siblings of current students, so that's another one. Parental rights across the education statutes are just placed in one area, so parents have one-stop shop to go for parental rights. Just a few other things on education excellence. There's some technical changes. Districts now have to do a few less reports to the department, but put more stuff into the World Best Workforce Plans. Gifted and talented procedures and processes need to be put in there. Your school readiness plan, no longer the commissioner, but just the new World Best Workforce Plan. Systems on student access to effective and diverse teachers, and a process to examine equitable distribution of those effective teachers. Some cleanup statutes reflecting what the ESSA changes are going to be, and you no longer have to submit your short-term limited contract report. On teachers for licensure, there's a legislative study group on education licensure. There's some allowing Montessori accredited teachers to teach at a Montessori school without full teacher licensure. Out-of-state teachers, DOT has to issue an out-of-state license teacher for initial licenses, restricted in content and grade levels. And then there's from the Senate some standardization and cleanup of licensure statutes. So not a whole lot of damage to the licensure statutes this year, but still, there was an OLA report that said pump the brakes, stop doing stuff to the licensure statute and figure it out, and the legislature still kind of disregarded that advice from the OLA. Career and technical education, Board of Teaching can issue 2 one-year waivers to individuals with a bachelor's degree, 2 years of work history in that area, and enrolled in an alternative licensure program or CTE instruction. The board must strongly encourage prep programs to develop an alternative pathway for CTE licensure. The institute has to provide a CTE instructor alt-prep program, so that might provide a better pipeline for these teachers. And then they're creating a career and technical education licensure that development report for the world's best workplace report. So we're hoping that this will reduce some of the workload for districts in terms of the communication with the department. Just make it a community discussion. There's a lot of placement of access to diverse and effective teachers. You heard a little bit before, spread across the statutes. It's in the Teacher Development and Evaluation Statute, Teacher Tenure Act, Supply and Demand Report, and Achievement and Integration Statute. A little bit more on discipline. Teacher of record has general, same teacher has general control and government of the school and classroom, and teacher may remove students from the class for violent or disruptive conduct. Moving on quickly to special education.
Do you have any real sense for that?
The
Removing
discipline.
from the classroom, is that for the day? Is that expelling them or suspending them from the class? What, I mean, this one has the potential to be a administrative nightmare.
Right.
Given the suspension and expulsion can only be done by administrators before.
Right. I think this is remove them from class. I don't know if this is expel or suspend. But again, as I mentioned before, these are provisions that were added in without a whole lot of discussion. And we really wanted to have discussion to talk about the impact in this discipline working group. So again, this is something that we're going to have to look at. Lawyers are going to have to take a look at what the standard is. I completely agree.
And the only concern on this was that this would need to be looked at early on because the day kids come back to school.
You're going to start having stuff happen. And that working group's going to meet this summer. This is something I can take back to the department. You know, let's look at the provisions that were put in there that are kind of big red flashing lights that are going to have an immediate impact on all of you just come the first day of class. Yes?
So, just for some clarity, have these provisions already been signed into law?
No.
So what can we do to get them not signed into law?
Well, here's the thing, is that the governor would have to not sign the bill. Since these are policy provisions, the governor cannot line item veto. You can only line item veto appropriations, but not policy language. So he would have to not sign the bill and say, let's take it back into special session and I don't want these things, or legislature says I don't want these things. So it's an uphill battle. One of the things that could be done is advocating to legislators to remove some of these provisions or change them next year. That is also an uphill battle, but that's one of the ways. If these are problematic provisions, there's going to need to be some mobilization at the district level to say these provisions don't work. Take the recommendations from the discipline working group because those if they do so. So I'm sorry, that's the reality, but once they have that bill, and it's a huge omnibus bill of all divisions, so in the eyes of legislature, this is just a teeny tiny thing for them. For you, it's huge. For them, it's tiny. And so stopping the bill over one provision is kind of over, unfortunately.
There's more than one thing in here.
Yeah, no, true. I agree. In terms of special education, some of the recommendations for the restricted procedure working group to align with requirements under the Homestead Plan were adopted, and those put on restraints to list of prohibited procedures and requires quarterly reporting on the use of seclusion. In terms of paperwork, as Tom mentioned, there's some paperwork stuff going on. The department has to certify if and when schools interoperability framework software becomes available. A student with an IEP does not need a transition plan if the IEP meets the parameters of the transition plan, so hopefully that reduces some paperwork requirements for special ed teachers. The department, as Tom mentioned, must produce 25% state-required special education paperwork. So that's going to be some fun stakeholder groups. For an evaluation team, insurance, and other health disability, the team must seek written proof signed by a licensed provider. Are there any districts here who are charter authorizers? So there is some language in there that goes towards charter authorizers in the MAPES system. The districts that are authorized can satisfy the requirements by submitting a written promise to the commissioner. And in terms of the data that we collect from you on financial issues, we have to use data that we already have so as to facilitate any paperwork requirements for those districts that are being changed. And both House and Senate brought that language to the table. Charters that serve predominantly special education students can now accept kindergarten students. This is for the Metro Dept school, and there was $69,000 on the intention there to help that out. There's some non-controversial technical stuff to clean up based on the recodification from last year and some stuff that came from our charter division. Facility technology, solar panels must conform to the National Electrical Code. Tom mentioned these for self-sufficiency and lifelong learning in the ADE statute. And notable items not in the bill. So the last in, first out was a big ticket thing last year. It was still on the House bill going in, that wasn't accepted. Early learning scholarship changes, there was an attempt to make Pathway 2 scholarships portable. So that would really reduce the capacity of school districts that have those slots for their early learning program. Those were not adopted either. MDE, publishing test preparation costs for districts, not adopted. MDE, distributing settlement funds from testing disruptions to affected districts. That would have been incredibly difficult to administer. Innovation zones, both the House and Senate had different innovation zone plans. They couldn't come to an agreement for some reason. I'm not sure why. They could have combined them together. We had some concerns about the implementation in terms of federal law, but the advocates had accepted one of our amendments to make it possible. They couldn't come to an agreement, and that got shoved off the table. There were integration revenue changes in response to the proposed rule that we had for the integration revenue program. Those were not adopted from the House side, and then the Board of Teaching was to create an endorsement for those teachers that had achieved the 18 credits for concurrent enrollment courses. As you know, the HLC was reaffirming the requirements that all teachers teaching for enrollment had 18 credits of graduate work to be able to teach those courses, and that change for the DOT endorsement was not adopted. And with that, that is the end of my portion. I don't know if we have some time for questions.
We've got time for questions. I just want to say that, Julie, you asked a question about the dyslexia. I've been in meetings, is this on? Yeah, I've been in meetings with the dyslexia group, the decoding dyslexia, and this is really going to be a tricky area moving forward because you still have to meet the criteria. Dyslexia is a medical diagnosis, and you still have to meet all the criteria for specific learning disability to get special ed. So the group of parents of dyslexic students just are acknowledged that their kids aren't special ed, but they're kind of they need help. And they need, and I mean, they've got the research and everything, and this is a real fight in the school psychology community. But you're correct in that this is going to be a regular ed initiative, and where's the money going to come from, and how much teaching time do you have, and so it's a very, very difficult issue. It's going to be a very, very difficult issue moving forward because they are very aggressive and they are very organized. And they're looking for money, they're looking for tax breaks to do tutoring outside of school, things like that. So, but it's going to be something that I think is going to be continued to talk about.
The way that those bullet points on slide number 60 are written, it suggests to me that any of the students who we report as not reading at grade level to MDE by July 1 would also need to have the alternate instruction? Or is that only on the dyslexia piece? Just the way the bullets look, it almost says you have to do it for anybody not reading at grade level.
It's anybody not reading at grade level because the dyslexia and convergence insufficiency language, that sentence was dropped into the middle of the dyslexia piece is more about, they actually wanted evaluation, and evaluation was changed to screening. And it may be one and the same, and this is one of the real problems working with this lobby is that they're not how can I say this diplomatically? They don't understand that words matter. And then when you say evaluation means something different than screening. When you say specific learning disability, that means something in special ed law that they're not quite comprehending somewhere else. And so I think that that's something to think about. You don't want to listen to me, you want to listen to these guys. Paul?
Tom, can you maybe just explain what happens at TRA? And is that going to get kicked down the road to next year? Or that'll have some pretty major implications for available funding.
With regard to TRA, I'm not sure, Adosh, if you had more information on the pensions bill, and I know that there was a look at the employer contributions going up. I don't think that happened this year, but I know that that's kind of on the plate for the future because of the funding issue.
Yeah, the employer contributions didn't go up. I know that they saved some money on some of the pensions by reducing the COLA for a year or two, but they didn't have the employer contributions going up by that 1% that they originally had in the proposal. And then just so you know, for the union contracts, those were all ratified with no changes. So when for us, May asked me, all the other unions were ratified with no changes.
Carolyn?
I have a question in regards to your educational excellence assessment piece. In regards to the ACT and the SAT, it seems to me like, and correct me if I'm wrong, the ACT geographically is the test that's popular here, not the SAT. I grew up on the East Coast, and the SAT was the test that we took. Why two tests? And is one weighted higher than the other when colleges and universities look at, the application pool and the testing pool?
So I can't speak specifically to every institution and what they look at. As you know, in the Midwest, the ACT is a widely accepted test. I personally took the SAT and went to a Minnesota school, so it's fine. I've seen SAT lobbyists and their members actually be a little bit more active at the legislature in the past couple of years. So I think that's also a push to start recognizing SAT as an option for a nationally recognized college entrance exam. And I think that goes to it. I think as you see in the federal law and our state laws, a lot of it is about a nationally recognized college entrance exam. And where we see ACT, I think there's a push to say, well, the SAT is a nationally recognized exam as well, so that should be included. But I can't speak to any individual institution accepting ACT or SAT more, other than just kind of my general knowledge of ACT. I know some schools, especially the privates, require SAT 2s, so that could have a play into the kind of the calculus there.
Thank you.
Jerry?
Well, the one statement that made more sense than anything else was the one reducing the amount of special ed paperwork. Can you imagine how many reams of paper it's going to take just to define that one statement?
For hours of discussions, yes, and justifications, yes. Lots of hot air. Point well taken.
More questions?
The school board special election, please?
Yes. School board can appoint, depending, the power comes back with you. The tenure of that appointment lasts till the next November and not the next general election. So if you're in an odd number year, you have to have the election, but that's better than it was. I don't know in the case of Howard Lake Waverly where they had only one person filed, they still had to have an election in the middle of April. Unless I always have to envision at Easter dinner, somebody says, hey, there's a special school board election, let's all go right in Bob. And all of a sudden someone wins 7-5 or something. Any more questions? I did want, Tom, I don't know if you mentioned it, but the broadband is in at $35 million. And that's different than the broadband that was in the House bill. The House had some kind of narrow broadband, basically the hotspot piece. A lot of that's for if you want to Wi-Fi your buses, there's an opportunity to do that. But the other broadband initiative is $35 million, and that's the That's going to go out in grants to cities, counties, townships. So that's there as well. And I know there's a lot of people here that are interested in the broadband. Paul?
If there is something that happens in a special session, is there anything from education that's on the radar?
So in terms of special education,
Special session?
I'm sorry, special session, getting my words right. Words matter, right? So right now, the big discussion is on the bonding bill. And sitting in the bonding bill for education are library construction grants, which we know the library community is, they use them a lot. It's about $2 million a year. And then funding for the Early Learning Center in Red Lake District. They've come every single year since 2005 for bonding and have had mild success, so this would be a big win for them. There is discussion about, certain provisions in the bill that maybe don't look so great. I can't speak for the governor's office, but I don't think that the budget bill will be up for consideration in the special session. I think if there's any changes, it would be a governor's line item veto for some appropriation sections, but I can't speak to what. It's a huge bill, and I know there's some not so great things in there across the divisions. So it's going to be a very slim kind of plate that they're looking at.
I was just going to say, I just got an email from President Kaler, and I don't know if I'm the only one or if everybody in the Alumni Association got it, but I think that they're really hitting on the lack of bonding bill and how important that would be for the U of M. So, anything else? Well, I know we're the first ones out of the gate with you guys usually, and so it's really great to throw this together and give us the insight. Again, a very hectic session, and as Adosh said, of the 600 pages, and there are about 200 of them are education, and a lot of it's policy. So, and I just want to urge everyone here to apply for become the pilot site for the Rock and Lead program.
And we will promise that.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll bring Brad up for member recognition part of our agenda.
Presents. Well, we got some folks that will be leaving us unless they joined up with our new retiring members membership that we. And so I want to urge you that with the retiring membership category that we community members. So we really want to recognize some people who have been very, very instrumental in the success of this organization. People who have served in important roles in the organization. First, I want to start with Jim Bailey. Jim, would you please come up? Jim has been our legislative chair the last few years. He's been very, very good because he's managed to make Senator Kiffmeyer a close personal friend of mine, which is something I've always been kind of in my on my radar. So, that was on my bucket list. So it's Jim. Here you go. Thank you. Also, we have for our departing president, we have a plaque here because he will be past president. So we want to bring up Scott Hansen. Scott, you've led us through a very exciting year, and you've, I guess to say, I'm guessing that Deb has been giving you notes, but you seem to do well without them as well. So Scott. And last but not least, to someone who has been a member of this organization in 2 different school districts and has, I don't know what role he hasn't played in the organization. If we've had a committee, he's been on it. He's been our designee to the Alliance for Student Achievement. He's been very, very strong on the legislative committee. He's provided guidance. He's provided testimony. He's been everywhere we've asked him for the last 20 years. or so, and I think so. Let's bring up Chris Richardson. I'll kill the suspense here.
Get up on the stage, so it's all good.
That's right, we'll get the mic down here.
Yes.
Thank you, Chris, for all you've done.
Sir, appreciate it.
Now we'll send it back to the president, or can I adjourn the meeting from up here? Or can you adjourn the meeting from up there? I can't make the motion. I'm not